What's up, everybody? On today's video, we're going to learn a little bit about illegal immigration in Florida because of the new law SB1718. The inspiration for this law comes from SB56, a law that was implemented in Alabama. So how has that law worked for Alabama? Well, not very well. The percentage of Hispanic community in Alabama that is illegal is almost twice higher by percentage than in Florida. States with heavy anti-Hispanic sentiment actually attract a larger percentage of illegal immigrants, with Alabama and Arkansas, the most backward states, having the largest percentage of their Hispanic population being undocumented. The explanation for that is fairly simple to understand. These laws are not based off of legal status, they're based off of anti-Hispanic sentiment. Laws like SB 1718 and HB 56 violate constitutional rights of U.S. citizens, and nobody's going to migrate to a state that has laws that are unconstitutional and violate your civil rights. However, it does very little to actually prevent illegals from moving to that place to do jobs that other people simply don't want to do, which means that the state actually becomes attractive for illegals. Even in the state of Florida, foreign-born people make more money in areas that have less percentage of foreign-born nationals when compared to areas that have large Hispanic or immigrant communities where their immigrants actually make less. So now in theory, those who do decide to stay in Florida illegally are actually kind of a hot commodity. They're actually going to make more money. In effect, these laws keep away legal immigrants for the fear of being discriminated, and the ones that are illegal are actually kind of more valuable, as the fields that they work in, like construction and agriculture, are going to be in a bigger need for employees since less illegals are willing to work in Florida. And guys, this isn't my opinion, this is analytical. Whether you like it or not, it's the truth. A lot of people get mad at me because I'm saying things they don't want to hear. My job isn't to kiss up to you and say everything that sounds pretty. My job is to study analytics and provide content that is actually relevant to what's going on in our state of Florida. And if you've paid close attention to my channel, I don't mention specific politicians and their policies. I mention the state laws that are in place and how they affect the economy. I don't talk about political affiliations. I give you raw information, raw analytics. I've never shown support for any politician or defamed any particular politician. All I've done is report from the ground what's taking place and let you draw your own conclusions. But when my job consists of traveling to places and studying analytics, I'm not going to sit here and tell you something that sounds pretty when analytically I know it's wrong. And we're in the age of misinformation right now. And it's not because information isn't available, it's because people only want to hear what they like to hear, and if you tell them something they don't like, they tune out. But anything that you want to know today is at the tip of your fingertips. Hey Siri, how heavy is a chimpanzee?
Here's an answer from animals.com. Chimpanzees are smaller than humans, weighing between 57 and 110 pounds.
Anything that you want to know today, all you have to do is ask your phone and it will tell you. However, despite how accessible information is today, people believe lies simply because that's what they want to believe. California's full of illegals there. The border's wide open. Of the 1.5 million illegals who've left the United States, over 500,000 were in California, which means no other state has had a larger reduction of its illegal population than California. And New York City is full of illegals. No other city has had a larger reduction in its illegal population than New York City over the last 20 years. When you look at the reduction of illegal immigrants, New York City and the state of California are actually the prime examples of places where these populations are being reduced. But again, real numbers and real information are completely unknown facts to people today. And it's not about legal or illegal, it's just about the fact that they're racist and they don't want Hispanics in this country. But they can't openly say what they really feel because they know that what they feel is wrong. But even though they know it's wrong, they still have that sentiment. So they try to articulate their sentiment. The only thing that comes out is roll tide. My job also includes saying things that makes people angry, because if I don't get an emotional reaction from you, they don't get comments, and then our YouTube channel doesn't pick up the algorithm. I didn't make these rules, I just have to live by them. I think most of us understand that you have to have some type of sensationalism on the internet. I think the vast majority of you guys are smart enough to understand when I'm being sarcastic to drive home a point, and that you don't exactly have to agree with everything I say to be my subscriber. You can be my subscriber or even my friend and not agree with everything that I have to say. If your convictions are strong and well-founded, then you should have absolutely no problem hearing another perspective. Unless you're from Alabama, then the only thing you know how to do is scream, "Roll Tide!" It's mostly Florida's top earning and rich counties that have a larger illegal population. And it's the absolute poorest counties that don't have illegal immigrants. This correlation between Florida's wealth and an easily to exploit labor force, that alone would suggest that Florida depends on illegal immigrants for a lot of the work that takes place in the more affluent communities. The real problem is that Florida's immigrant communities are actually swallowing up entire sectors of the economy, from construction to development to real estate. A huge portion of the middle class that is Hispanic is starting to encroach upon the wealth. Take Naples, Florida, the wealthiest concentration in the United States. People from Miami that are Hispanic are starting to outprice people that are moving to Naples. So it's this encroachment of the economical growth of the Hispanic community in South Florida that has pressured the rich people to want to kind of put a buffer between the Hispanic communities and themselves, as the Hispanic community is now more powerful in construction, real estate, and many other sectors of the economy. All of Florida's most booming cash-making endeavors are in the hands of Hispanics, and they're just trying to put a lid on the explosion of Hispanic wealth in Florida, because now the Hispanic wealthy are actually encroaching and driving up prices in markets that were before only limited to white Americans. Then take the influx of wealthy Venezuelans that came to the United States to escape their country. Their notion of an immigrant is a Hispanic Mexican who's poor. Now you have Venezuelans coming over here with $200 million and buying beach houses like they're nothing. The wealthy whites in South Florida are starting to resent the acquisition power of the Hispanic community. If you look at the explosion of real estate values in Florida, despite the fact they've labeled it as people moving from New York and New Jersey and California, that has only been in the last little bit. Before 2022, all that growth was really coming from Venezuela. While South Americans drove up the real estate values in Dade and Broward County, Cubans were being displaced out of Miami, drove up the real estate values in Lee and Collier County, and Ocala and Orlando. Puerto Ricans bought up much of north central Florida. All these external factors drove up the Florida real estate market and made Florida's Hispanic population grow, where now there's even more Puerto Ricans in Florida than there are Cubans. After Hurricane Maria, a massive percentage of Puerto Ricans moved to the Orlando area. Despite what you heard, it was Puerto Ricans fleeing the hurricane that had money, Venezuelans that brought money to escape their regime, and other factors that have made Florida's Hispanic community become more power of acquisition readily available than the people that are moving here from other states. And while a lot of YouTubers tried to put it out that people from California and New York were moving here, those communities have been moving to Florida at the same rate roughly as previously. It's really been the influx of wealthy Latinos, predominantly from Puerto Rico and Venezuela, that have actually made Florida's real estate market become as strong as it is today. But what these people fail to notice is that these are all U.S. citizens coming from Puerto Rico. Venezuelans are wealthy and they could give two craps about working cutting grass. Now you also have Ukrainians and Russians coming into Florida, and they've started to become a significant economical factor in the real estate world as well, and in tourism. And you know what? In 5 years from now, there's no telling what country's going to have turmoil, and we'll have a completely new element in Florida that wasn't present before. I recently met a Venezuelan who moved to the Bradenton area where I live. He had $30 million US cash. With globalization of the world's economy, things cost as much in the United States as they do in Mexico or Costa Rica or Venezuela, which means an apartment building in South America is worth about as much as an apartment building here, and South America is full of wealth. If somebody wants to leave, they have a huge power of acquisition when they move to the United States and they're selling commercial real estate in Central America, South America. That's a lot of money. The new state law in Florida specifically mentions a few countries like Venezuela, China, and these people will no longer be allowed to acquire real estate in the state of Florida. As far as the country of China, it really makes a lot of sense not to allow somebody in China to start to speculate on Florida's real estate market. But with globalization and international markets going into turmoil, it's only logical that people are going to move their net worth into the US dollar or other currencies that are strong. Despite what people believe, Florida's labor force is only about 5% illegal immigrants. States like Alabama, who've done everything possible to get rid of them, are almost at 2% of their labor force being illegal immigrants. When you look at those two numbers and realize that Alabama has a very small foreign-born population and Florida has a very large foreign-born population, and the percentage in labor force participation difference is only like 3%, it only goes to show that these laws are very ineffective, and that the more legal Hispanics that you drive away from your state, the more reliable your state actually becomes on the ones that are there illegally. The only other way to explain that analytic is that people in Alabama simply are not working, which I could probably confirm that to a degree. Just at a simple glance, wouldn't you expect there to be like a 15 to 17% difference between these two states' illegal immigrant participation in the labor force? Turns out that it's not the case. It's only about 3%. Before I looked up that analytic, I was thinking between 13 to 17%. When I saw that it's just an insignificant percentage, that only goes to show that Alabama is actually more dependent on the labor of illegal immigrants than Florida is. And I can confirm to you that while living in Alabama, I made more money more readily than living in South Florida, which just confirms the fact that these laws actually make illegal immigrant labor much more profitable for those willing to take the risk. Then there's the notion that these illegal immigrant communities are crime-ridden. Well, let's take a look at the analytics. No, don't do it, Jose. I've been believing this for so long, and now you're gonna tell me I was wrong. I want to believe it. Don't tell me. Don't tell me, Jose. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Bubba, but I gotta show you these analytics. I don't want to see it. I'm gonna cover my ears. Alright, so take a look at these two maps. Notice how the disabled white population overlaps the areas where there's Hispanic communities, and that the white communities that do not have a Hispanic population, places like Hernando and Pasco County, are going to have extraordinarily high overdose rates and extraordinarily high crime rates for being rural counties. It may seem kind of difficult to understand a correlation between these two completely different analytics, but now that we hop into studying crime, we're going to find that some of the white communities that have a large disabled population and do not have a large Hispanic community are actually suffering with some of the worst crime in Florida. When studies compile crime index analytics, they don't use drug overdose deaths as a contributing factor to their index. However, I'm going to tell you that moving forward, it would start to make sense to consider drug overdose deaths as a serious factor right next to homicides as a contributing crime factor. I mean, you have a death, and most of the time you have consumption that led to the death. That's definitely a crime. Take states like Maine, who have extraordinarily high overdose death rates, or West Virginia, but they have low crime rates. So how does somebody die from an overdose if you don't have any crime? You definitely have consumption, which is illegal, and you have distribution, which is illegal. It's definitely not being prosecuted and documented in those states that those things are happening, but common sense will tell you, if you're looking at the results, the symptoms of crime, which are overdose death rates, then somewhere in there is a crime factor, whether it's being documented or not. This is where studying analytics requires you not just to look at raw numbers, but to also understand the reason those numbers exist, and if there's any type of variance that's not accounted for, to understand why that is. In other words, crime analytics only tell you so much superficially. There's a lot of background context, like each state's individual laws. There's states that don't persecute, don't go after certain crimes. Those crimes exist. Other states even go as far as legalizing things that are considered crimes in other states, or the definition of a crime varies by monetary amount. Some states it might be $90, some states it might be $300 or $600 or $1,000 to make the distinction between a property crime or a felony. All that accounts for crime analytics being somewhat subjective, and you really have to learn how to read between the lines and understand what those numbers actually mean. There's a lot of rural communities that are plagued with crime, and it's difficult to understand it analytically. The same thing can be said about a lot of inner cities, like some parts of Miami that are definitely crime-ridden, but when you look at Miami crime analytics, it shows up as one of the safest cities because of the population. Or cities like Jacksonville, which annexed the entire Duval County, or Louisville, Jefferson County, in an effort to lower their city limit crime rates. There's a lot of ways that crime analytics can be very misleading. Take the city of Jacksonville, Florida, and Louisville, Kentucky. If you were just to go back to the old city limits, the actual urban confines of the city, pound per pound, they're just as deadly as Birmingham or Jackson, Mississippi, but because they've annexed the entire county, they're able to lower their crime rates. If the city of Miami were to extend its city limits northbound, it would become much more dangerous. If it were to extend its city limits towards the south, it would become safer. That's why looking at counties for analytics is sometimes a lot more reliable than just looking at cities. But take Miami-Dade County. They have the lowest drug overdose rate of any region in Florida for both Hispanic and white populations at about 10 per 100,000. Going back to counties north of the regions highlighted, like Hernando and Pasco and Citrus, some of these counties' drug overdose death rates are 8 times higher than Miami, which is 70% Hispanic. And I know on paper people in Citrus County think they live in a very safe county, but when you have 8 times more drug overdose deaths than the city of Miami, it's not Miami that's got a crime problem, it's you in rural north central Florida. And that's measured by a rate. I know a lot of people didn't finish the 3rd grade and they don't know what a rate is. Use Siri to explain to you what the crap a rate is. Anytime that I talk about analytics, people start talking about population sizes, like if that mattered when you're talking about rates. Well, man, Jose, there's 1 billion people in Miami, and there's only 800 people here in my little town. So, look, Bubba, just go back to 3rd grade and find out the definition of a rate. All right, guys, so let's break down these crime analytics, because I don't want to just abruptly woo. I want to woo people into these numbers. I don't just want to tell you these numbers. Well, bless your heart. All right, so let's take a look at some of the medium-sized cities in Florida that have the worst crime rates. For medium-sized cities in Florida, these are the ones that have the highest crime rates. I hate to even have to touch this topic, and I'm not a cop, I'm not a judge. All I do is study analytics. I'm not going to get into the reasons why this problem exists, because that's a whole different topic for a video. But unfortunately, everything in orange are cities that predominantly have a crime problem in their African American communities. And again, I'm not a cop or a judge. I'm not responsible for this. I'm just giving you the information. Nothing I can do to change anything here. Everything in orange is African American communities. Everything highlighted in blue are areas that are predominantly white and just absolutely have a void of Hispanic communities. On this list, only Lake Worth and Cocoa have significant illegal communities that you could say could analytically contribute to having a large crime problem. So at least in middle-sized cities, there's no way to analytically prove that illegal immigrants are part of the problem, or even Hispanic communities that are legal. On the other side of that spectrum, the safest cities in Florida, highlighted in yellow, are those wealthy communities that depend on that illegal labor. Places like Naples and Punta Gorda, where the community really depends on that labor of illegal people for their affluent lifestyles. Highlighted in green are Hispanic communities, and green dots in places like Naples and Marco Island means that they have somewhat of a Hispanic community. But we can actually see that Hispanic communities, not only where they live, but also where they work, are actually going to have some of the safest crime analytics. And that there's an economical dependency of illegal immigrant work in very affluent communities, definitely a factor not present in poor rural counties. Now here's a disturbing analytic. If you see in the green, that's the drug overdose death rate in Miami for Hispanics. Extraordinarily low. However, highlighted in yellow are how high the overdose death rates are for Hispanics who live in areas that are mostly white and rural. Now this analytic revolves like a circle, and it does the same thing in black areas as it does in white areas. For example, if a white person lives in a predominantly black area, their chances of overdosing are exponentially higher than a white person living in a white community. Or if a black person lives in a Hispanic community, vice versa. This goes all the way around. And what this shows you is that analytically, when you move into a community that isn't the one you're from, you become disproportionately more likely to have horrible things happen to you. Could this analytically show that Hispanics that move into rural white counties are definitely going to end up being more vulnerable to addiction and all types of crime? Absolutely. Anytime that Hispanic communities move into states like Arkansas, Alabama, or even in rural parts of Florida, they are much more propense to crime. The reason for that is that the moment that you become marginalized demographically, you lose opportunities and you end up in despair. And it is true that in these poor rural white communities, the specimens of Hispanics that they see on a daily basis are absolutely the worst representation of our community as possible, and that is possibly why they draw up these horrible conclusions. But if they were to come to a place like Miami or here in the Tampa area and see more successful Hispanic communities, then they would understand that it's not so much that the individual generalization of this demographic is bad, it's only the specimens that they get to see in their communities aren't the best analytical representations. Prejudice does marginalize people, and being marginalized makes you more propense to engaging in crime and other activities that are despairing. Even within a marginalized Hispanic community like what you find in Fort Myers or Bradenton, the poorest communities of illegals that are marginalized within a metropolitan area, the white population that lives within that Hispanic community is within that same circle being marginalized by their immediate community, which means that most of the homeless and addict people that you're going to find actually live within Hispanic communities. If you go to Miami, a lot of the homeless people are going to be white and not Hispanic. So a white person moving to a Hispanic community becomes as marginalized as a Hispanic moving into a rural community, which just goes to show that really, when it comes down to it, we're all exactly the same. And it's really the factor of marginalizing communities or individuals that leads to the propensity of addiction or even to the involvement in criminal activities. So the notion that one race is demographically or analytically better than other people has really no bearing to somebody like myself who actually studies an analytic and understands that these factors can work in either direction. A white person can be marginalized in a Hispanic community, and a Hispanic person moving to a rural white community will have the same effect. Now, when you look at specific communities in Florida that have the highest concentration of illegals, you're going to find that in Southwest Florida, Lee and Collier County, that's the Naples and Fort Myers area, neighborhoods like Tice, Naples Manor, Immokalee, and Pine Manor are not only some of the most poor, crime-ridden areas, but these are the illegal communities that are adjacent to the wealthy areas. Despite the fact that these poor immigrant communities have attached themselves to the most wealthy areas, economically, their outlook ranks them among the poorest cities in the entire state. In fact, we just did a video on the poorest cities in Florida, and places like Pine Manor, Immokalee, Naples, Manor, these places that are on this list with the largest illegal communities that are adjacent by chance to some of the richest communities are actually the most marginalized, crime-ridden, and poor communities in the entire state. These immigrant communities here in Florida are really better off going to another state where they can incorporate into a larger community that's not being exploited by the ultra-wealthy. Lee and Collier County have the highest concentrations of communities with illegal population, and I come from those poor communities. I don't think that you guys understand when you see the way I feel about what's happening in the state of Florida, that I come from communities that are the poorest and the most marginalized communities in the entire state of Florida. I spent over 20 years of my life living in poor Collier County, and a lot of these communities like Immokalee, Pine Manor, Naples Manor, communities are the poorest with the highest percentages of illegals. These are the communities where I grew up in, and the people that live in those communities, they are the community that I grew up with and that I love. Just like you love your community, these are the communities that I love because these are the people and places that I grew up around. I don't care what their legal status is. These were my neighbors. These were the people in the community where I grew up in. So it's understandable for me, coming from these communities that have the highest percentages of illegals in the entire state of Florida, to have a different view on these communities than you living in a rural area. The people I talk to, the food that I eat, everything within these communities in South Florida is in one way or another related to these illegal communities of Mexicans, Guatemalans. So even though I'm Cuban and I'm a legal U.S. citizen, when I see these communities going through what they're going through, it upsets me because these are the communities that I grew up in. I don't know where you live, what city and state you live in, and what type of things you have in your community with the immigrants, because maybe in your community they're marginalized just like they are where I grew up. But at the same time, growing up in Bonita Springs, Golden Gate, Immokalee, Naples Manor, Pine Manor, all of these communities like Tice that are on this list of the cities in Florida with the highest illegal populations, I never worried about my safety. I never had an illegal person try to rob me. Perhaps if you live in a rural community where the Hispanics are being marginalized and thus they're more propense to criminal activity because of their marginalization, your opinion of an illegal is going to differ from mine. But me, that spent over 20 years of my life in these communities in South Florida, to me, I can't have anything bad to say about these people. I remember when I was 15 years old, my first car ever, a man from Mexico who was our neighbor let me have a car so I could go to work. During the recession, when we were unemployed, waiting for extensions for unemployment, no way out, a Mexican person said, "Here, take that truck and trailer, pay it back to me whenever you can, go work for yourself," because at that time, nobody was hiring. In 2015-16, when I was building my house, I had a guy from Mexico who was going to go back to Mexico voluntarily because Trump had got elected and he decided he was going back to Mexico. He taught me how to build my house step by step so that when he left, I could finish the work he was doing so I wouldn't have to hire somebody else to finish my house. All these communities have done is help me when I was in need. Today, my audience is predominantly Americans, and my livelihood today, the support of my channel, does not come from Hispanic communities. Most of them don't speak English, and my channel is English-based, which means that my content is not aimed at these people or gaining their support. They don't watch my videos. The topics that I explore don't interest Hispanic communities. They interest predominantly an American audience. But I do feel that part of the authenticity and validation that I have on this channel from you guys, my audience, is the fact that I keep it real and genuine, even with the fact that sometimes my honesty simply goes against the current of my audience's sentiments. And that's okay. We really don't have to agree on everything. I'm a believer that you can have friends of all types of ideologies and that you don't exactly have to agree on every single thing for somebody to be your friend. But if you do disrespect me or somebody else on this channel, please believe that there's no toleration for that. So while I welcome all types of respectful conversation on my channel, if you cross the line of disrespect, I will block you. And I've had subscribers that have been with me for years. One day they drink too much and they say something inappropriate and I block them. Not because I don't want to listen to what they have to say or that I want to censor their ideology. You can have a different opinion than me. You just have to respect me. Alright guys, so that is a little information on what this new law in the state of Florida could imply. It really isn't going to change a lot of things. It's also noteworthy that in the state of Florida, upwards of 30 to 60% of our tourism during the off season comes from Latin American countries, and it seems like that number could be reduced significantly. And it's not just illegals who work in hospitality along the coast. There's a lot of people that depend on that tourism whether they like it or not. I remember working for a lady in rural Shelton County, Alabama, and she had to sell her house to move to Birmingham because she needed to be close to a dialysis center and they didn't have one in that area. She ended up telling me that she wasn't going to sell her house because the people that were buying it were Mexicans. Oh, what a horror. I called her daughter, who called me out on the job and was paying me for the job, and I said, hey, listen, this lady's over here talking bad about Hispanics and how they're buying her house and how she doesn't want to sell her house to a Hispanic. Her daughter told me, look, she has to sell the house and she has to move to Birmingham or she's going to die. And these are the only people that are willing to buy this property cash because a bank won't finance it because the house needed a lot of work. And you are Hispanic and you're the only person I could find to do the clean out job to prepare the house for the sale. A lot of these old people, they're stubborn and they don't understand that whether they're selling a house or using a service, the person who's going to provide that service or buy a house cash may be somebody that they don't like. So I hung up the phone on the young lady and I talked to the old lady and I said, hey, I tried to make her reason. I said, hey, what happens if you don't sell your house? She's like, well, if I don't sell my house, I'm going to die. I need to be in the dialysis center, but I don't want a Mexican to have my house. They're coming in here and buying everything. The hate that this woman had ingrained in her against Hispanics was so large that she was willing to die to make sure that a Hispanic person wasn't able to, with good U.S. currency, buy her house. Guys, Alabama is falling apart. Look at this footage we've seen from the city of Miami. Skylines, buildings, new cars, so much money in progress. Everybody wants to move here from all over the world. Alabama and Mississippi used to be the richest place in the world. Look at what it is today with perfect weather. Overnight lows in Alabama are in the 30s, and even in the winter you get days in the 50s and 60s. Despite having perfect weather, despite having some of the most beautiful geography in the United States, Alabama is one of the most dangerous places you could live. The city of Birmingham, Alabama has a murder rate 4 times higher than the city of Chicago. The murder rate in the entire state of Alabama and Mississippi combined is more dangerous than the vast majority of large cities in the United States. That includes rural areas. Despite the fact Alabama's falling to crap because the policies and ideologies that they have in these places simply don't work, why are states like Florida that are thriving modeling their state laws after a place like Alabama that's clearly failed? One thing that I learned about people in Alabama while living there for a year is that they would rather torment themselves if they're able to prolong their hate. You might think if something's conveniently good for you, if something's analytically good, that you would want that element in your community if it's going to make your community a better place. Not the people of Alabama. They know what's good for their communities. They would rather let their towns fall to crap and become abandoned than allow other communities to move into them and make them better. And I know to the vast majority of us, that doesn't make any sense. But to the people of Alabama, they would rather watch their town go to crap, be abandoned and empty and burnt down, than they would rather see it be successful if it means that an outside element like a Hispanic community is to be blamed for the progress. Do you think the people of Alabama don't know that their state is in bad shape? They don't care. As long as they get to keep prolonging their backwards views, and that's the white and the black people of Alabama, by the way, as long as they can continue to prolong their hate and animosity towards other people, they would rather live in poverty and misery as long as they're able to continue to engage in what they love to do, hate. In the vast majority of North Central Florida and the Florida Panhandle, absolutely nothing is going to change. But I know this, when the rich people in South Florida don't have clean access to hospitality, restaurants, and leisure, as well as their lawns being mowed and their pool being cleaned, and all of the services and comforts that they're used to not being provided, they're a little smarter than the people in Alabama. At least I hope that the people in Florida who are wealthy are smarter than the people that live in Alabama. And I hope that the Hispanic communities that are moving to other states because they were here illegally get a little smarter too. Because living in abhorrent poverty next to shameless luxury and being a servant to the ultra rich only to your own detriment is about as stupid of a decision as you can make as well. The fact that the poorest communities in Florida are adjacent to the wealthiest is also an embarrassment that needs to be addressed. And it's not going to be addressed by the rich people because they're just going to try to exploit the next person in line, which could be you sitting comfortably in the middle class. But I'll tell you this, me personally, I made the determination to never, ever again be exploited by the wealthy only to live in abhorrent poverty. I'd rather get burned by the robbed and shot by in Alabama than I will to be exploited ever again by these rich people in Naples. So while I don't know who's going to mow their lawn, I can guarantee you one thing, it sure as crap isn't going to be me. I would rather starve than be exploited by these rich people ever again. Y ahora si quieren bailar, busquen otro timbalero.